Well, amazing. My name is Erica Woods. Welcome to today's Apex hosted webinar. We have a powerhouse panel of experts from our cyber solutions team ready to discuss all things PCI compliance. A couple quick housekeeping items for me. We are recording this session. You are going to receive a copy via automated email over the next few hours. So again, you'll get that. You are also going to get a copy of the slide deck in that email, and I'm going to drop the link to the slides also at the end so everyone has it. And last but not least, if you have comments, if you have questions, if you have resources that are helpful for this particular topic, please drop those into the chat box. We will likely not have time to do Q&A at the end, but we will be setting up a follow-up email for any questions that come through. So with that, hand it over to Emil. Thank you guys so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Erica. And welcome, everyone. I'm Emil de Guzman, and I'll be the moderator for today's PCI DSS 4.01 panel. I am the Director for Security and Risk here at Apex, working with clients to ensure their cybersecurity program and risk management programs, PCI included. I spent 25 plus years in IT security, serving as a CISO and vCISO for organizations. Let me briefly introduce our panelists, then I'll invite each of them to add color from their own perspective. First, Ryan.
Sure. My name is Ryan McGlathry. I'm a senior lead consultant with Apex, bringing background that spans from hands-on assessment, security leadership, security strategy, and executive leadership. I've spent about 8 years as a QSA and have served as a CISO and a fractional CISO for multiple organizations. Also, I hold an MBA from the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business.
Thanks, Ryan.
Take it away, Larry.
Sure, you bet. I'm Larry Botker. First, thank everybody for attending today. We're looking forward to talking to you. I'm a lead consultant here at Apex. I have about, Ryan and I, sounds like we're about in the same boat. I have about 30 years of IT and cybersecurity experience. I've worked with as a vCISO, a CISO, an assessor, auditor, engineer, and penetration tester. I've done a lot in 30 years, I guess, in IT and cybersecurity. For the last 20 years, I've been helping clients with their PCI initiatives. Basically, I've been involved with PCI since its inception back in early 2000. On average, I've conducted about 15 to 20 PCI assessments a year for the last 20 years. And let me tell you, I think the transition to 3.2.1 to 4.0.1 has been a game changer. A lot more documentation and work is needed to maintain compliance, and I'm looking forward to talking through that with you today. Armin, back over to you.
Thanks, Larry. Hello, everyone. Armin Hernandez, Senior Lead Consultant here at Apex Systems, a cybersecurity, privacy, and risk practitioner with over 18 years of experience leading enterprise security and compliance programs, including serving as a CISO and vCISO. I'm an active PCI qualified security assessor, an ISO 27001 lead auditor, and hold certifications across security, privacy, and risk. From a PCI perspective, my focus on this talk is on assessment, execution, and interpretations, how PCI DSS 401 is validated in practice, where organizations struggle, and what QSAs are actually looking for during audits. I'm excited to share practical insights, what passes, what fails, and why. With that, I'll hand it back to Emil.
Thank you, Ryan, Larry, and Armin. With that breadth, assessment, and interpretation, security architecture and controls, and governance and risk, we're well positioned to unpack what PCI 4.01 really demands in practice. Let's jump into our first topic, how to approach certification differently than the previous 3.21. PCI 4.01 represents the biggest evolution of the standard in nearly a decade. It's not just a technical upgrade, it's a shift in mindset towards continuous security and risk ownership. Today, we'll cover how to approach certification, what to prioritize, the new TRA, targeted risk analysis requirement, common pain points, and moving from 3.2.1 to the new version and pitfalls to avoid. Let's start at a high level. If an organization is beginning its PCI 4.01 journey, how should they approach certification differently than they did with 321? Well, we'll have three different perspectives for this topic from a QSA, a technical perspective, governance risk, and point of view. First, let's go with Armand from a QSA perspective.
Thank you, Emil. So the PCI DSS 4.0.1 represents a fundamental shift in how compliance is assessed. First, the shift from checkbox compliance to security outcomes. Under 401, security controls that were considered best practice are now mandatory. A good example is MFA. It is no longer enough to say MFA is planned or partially deployed. As assessors, we must validate that MFA is fully operational. You enforce it consistently, resistant to phishing where applicable, and actually reduces access risk. That's kind of the key word there, right? In other words, we're validating outcomes, not intentions or documentation. This reflects the wider shift toward continuous outcome-driven security controls and not static compliance. Okay. The second is understanding the intent of each requirement. PCI DSS 4 introduced the customized approach, which gives organizations flexibility, but only if they understand the intent behind the requirement. For example, instead of traditional file integrity monitoring, which everybody's familiar, a cloud-native organization might use container runtime security to detect unauthorized changes. From QSA standpoint, the question is not what tool you use. It's whether the control achieves the intent of detecting unexpected changes to critical files. This means QSAs are acting more as interpreters of intent, not just auditors checking boxes. Okay. Third, early gap assessment against 401, not mapping from 321. This is one of the most common mistakes we see in most organizations today, mapping 321 controls forward, assuming they are covered. Right? Many requirements in 401 have been reconstructed or expanded, and some are entirely new. For instance, script inventory and management, real-time detection. This did not exist in 321. They cannot simply be mapped. A fresh gap assessment against 401 helps identify resource-intensive changes early instead of scrambling at audit time. So from QSA standpoint, organizations that engage early, either internally or with their PCI consultants, have far smoother audits. Treat PCI DSS 401 as a security transformation, not a documentation exercise. With that, I'll hand it over back to you, Emil.
Thank you so much. We can say that under 4.01, how you meet the requirement matters as much as whether you meet it. This is where Apex PCI team, here in front of you now, can provide assistance in guiding organizations to prove effectiveness, not just existence of controls. This captures the essence. Compliance is no longer about what you do, but how effectively you do it. Let's get Larry's input here from a technical point of view. Larry?
Thank you, Emil. First off, I just want to remind folks again that these slides will be available to you. I'm going to give you some eye tests here, I think, but there's a lot on here, as you see. The intent of these mind maps that you're going to see throughout this presentation are to give you enough information to get started today. And we'll provide examples to some of these that are items that are on the mind maps. But again, due to time, we'll discuss these afterwards. And of course, if you want to talk in detail, we could talk all day about PCI, but we only have an hour. But if you want to talk in detail about some of these items, please reach out to us and schedule some time with us, and we'll walk through some of these mind maps with you if you'd like to. We'll get started first of all with two of the biggest technical challenges that we're seeing in the industry right now. And that is the inventory of systems. There's a lot of things that have to be inventoried. A nice thing about inventory is it gives organizations the ability to see the visibility of all your components in the cardholder data environment, or the CDE. It also the other thing about inventories is they'll help you reduce reliance on just manual controls, which is, if you look to the right, you'll see that there's a lot of manual to automation that you can do here throughout the PCI compliance initiatives. So with that, I'd like to then talk about two of the most common challenges that we see, which is inventories and automation. And we'll get into the first eye test here we're going to give you. Emil, go ahead and go into the next slide. All righty. This mind map is really to give you an idea about all the things that have to be inventoried. And we'll just use one example again on this particular one. If you just look to the upper right, the payment data and data flow inventories, you really need to have an idea of where all your cardholder data is, including your sensitive authentication data, if you have that, and your data flow diagrams. So just that one item alone is going to get you along much further along in your PCI initiatives than doing anything else. So you start there with your inventories and your data flows, and then with that, you have every one of these have specific attributes that should be included in the inventory, and we again provide that to you. Once you have a solid inventory, and understanding of the processes around that inventory, then you can automate your task. Emil, would you please go to the next slide? We'll talk about automating task a little bit here. With automating task, the key here is taking what you're doing today, any manual tasks that you do, and converting those to automation as much as you possibly can. So for example, log reviews, a challenge, assets, as we talked about earlier, conducting the inventories. If you can automate those tasks, it's going to make it much more efficient and effective for you. A good example is what Armand was talking about earlier, file integrity monitoring 11.6.1, real-time change detection. If you can have your tools automated to identify when files change, that's going to be a lot easier than doing it manually, than going to your console and looking at the console's dashboard. Having that sent to you in emails or alerted to, in your email or your mobile device, that you can see it actually happening in near real time. That's going to be a lot more efficient and effective for you. Another thing that is important here about automation is just keep in mind a key thing here is that PCI is not just about snapshots anymore. For those of you that were doing 3.2.1 and your assessor asked for evidence and you provided snapshots, that's no longer going to work. It has to be ongoing demonstration and ongoing demonstration of your control's effectiveness. And it's no longer just about, again, just about being prepared for the assessment. It's making sure that you have business as usual initiatives throughout the year and not just a point in time initiative. With that, just some things to keep in mind here. Again, these mind maps will help you today get you started on what you should think about considering for automation. And again, that'll help you in the long term to be more efficient and effective. Emil, back to you.
Thank you. Great insights, Larry. PCI 4.01 isn't about proving you have controls. It's about proving they work continuously. From a technical perspective, just to summarize what Larry said, PCI is a call to modernize compliance operations by mapping systems and data flows, eliminating manual controls, automating evidence collection, and aligning tooling with outcomes. Organizations can not only achieve certification, but also strengthen their overall security posture in a sustainable way. Ryan, can you tell us more about the governance risk perspective, please?
Yes, thank you, Emil. So PCI DSS 3.2.1 and the ones before it, they were typically approached as an annual project, one that wasn't really often thought about for 10 months out of the year. You can hit spacebar. Thank you. As Larry pointed out, some used to refer to these as snapshots in time, like a pen test. This led to many not only being compliant at the time of the issuance of the ROC, but that doesn't really help for much of the year. In short, PCI is not a project and should no longer be approached as such. Next. In 4.01, PCI is meant to be approached as an ongoing program that provides continuous compliance. It requires organizations to embed compliance into governance and risk management frameworks. It's not a one-off project, but an ongoing program that demands clear ownership, updated policies, and sustained investment. It doesn't really have a beginning, middle, and end. Rather, it's an ongoing process. It's continuously monitored, continuously improved, and continuously compliant. So as I'm saying here, is you want to treat it like a program, not a process. So it really emphasizes continuous compliance rather than annual certification. It must be treated like a program integrated into enterprise risk management, not just a short-term initiative. So organizations that will treat PCI like an audit project, they really wound up scrambling for evidence for when it came time to do their assessment, and so that's what we're trying to avoid. Also, risk ownership needs to be assigned to both business and technical leaders. It's no longer just an IT responsibility. It requires risk-based approaches, meaning that both business and technical leaders must own risk tied to cardholder data. So, for example, in some of these, 12.5.2 mandates assigning roles and responsibilities to protecting cardholder data. So a reseller may assign the CISO responsible for technical controls, but the head of payments would be responsible for the vendor management relationships. You want to make sure that you update your policies early. So prepare for 401 before you have to do it, because a lot of failures start without outdated governance. As we were saying before, you can't map it one-to-one. It really needs to be reviewed and really analyzed, and things need to be changed quickly. Also, budget for ongoing compliance, so it's not an annual scramble. There are 64 new requirements in PCI 401, and the penalties for being out of compliance range from $5,000 to $100,000 per month. So really need to go make sure that you're budgeting for the things that you need to do to remedy any issues that you have at this point. Emil?
Thank you. Very straightforward from what just Ryan shared. Again, PCI 4.01 isn't an audit you pass once a year. It is a risk program you run every day. From a governance and risk perspective, PCI is about institutionalizing compliance. By treating PCI as a program, assigning clear ownership, updating policies proactively, and budgeting for ongoing compliance, organizations can avoid audit failures and strengthen their overall risk posture. So, next topic, if organizations can't do everything at once, which areas should they prioritize first? Let's hear it from Armin, please.
Thank you, Emil. From a QSA perspective, PCI DSS 401 prioritization is really about ensuring organizations do not just pass the audit, but build sustainable and defensible compliance. These four areas are where QSA certainly focus during the audit. First, scoping accuracy. 401 places greater emphasis on correctly defining your cardholder data environment, or CDE, and all connected systems. Misscoping is still one of the most common causes of audit issues. From assessment standpoint, we validate data flow diagrams, segmentation controls, third-party integrations to ensure nothing is in scope is missed. Remember, if scoping is wrong, even strong security controls elsewhere won't matter. Second, risk analysis documentation. Under 401, organizations are expected to document risk analysis, especially when using customized approaches. As QSAs, we are not just checking that a risk assessment exists, we are evaluating whether it's current, detailed, and tied to how business actually operates. Generic templates don't hold up under scrutiny. We're looking for evidence that is decided based on risk and were made intentionally and reviewed over time. Third, customized approach readiness. The customized approach provides flexibility, but it also raises the bar. When organizations choose alternative controls, QSAs assess whether those controls truly meet the intent of the requirement. That means clear documentation, defensible risk analysis, and evidence that control is operating effectively. Flexibility without rigor usually leads to delays or reassessment. And fourth, evidence quality. Big one. 401 emphasizes continuous demonstration of control effectiveness, not annual snapshot, as Larry mentioned earlier. Poor evidence quality remains a major pain point. From QSA perspective, strong evidence is timely, repeatable, and preferably automated. High-quality evidence reduces audit friction and demonstrates that compliance is embedded into daily operation of the organization. So organizations that prioritize these four areas tend to reduce audit friction and fewer surprises. 401 rewards accuracy, clarity, and operational maturity. And those priorities need to be addressed early, not at audit time. That's my QSA perspective. Back to you, Emil.
Thanks, Armand. Our key takeaway from what Armand just shared, in PCI DSS 4.01, QSAs aren't just checking controls, they're validating scope, risk intent, and evidence. Most PCI failures aren't control failures, they're more of scoping and documentation failures. For QSAs, prioritizing scoping accuracy, risk documentation, customized approach, and evidence quality ensures organizations not only achieve certification, but also build a compliance program that withstands scrutiny and strengthens security outcomes. Larry, tell us, please, what should we be focusing next?
Thank you, Emil. From a technical perspective, there are four areas that we've seen in the last year through assessments that most clients are challenged with, and we're going to cover those four briefly. First off is authentication, as we've been talking about with MFA. Huge emphasis. You'll hear us repeat it a lot because this is one of the things we see commonly not in a place or has gaps when we do the assessments, but it's implemented for all it used to be for just the administrator accessing the CD. Now it's for all access into the C needs to have MFA. So just that one thing alone has been a challenge for some organizations because they may be using legacy password-only systems, and those password-only systems may not be able to do MFA. So they're failing that they're not able. They either have to think about removing or replacing their MFA system or their authentication systems, or integrating that with systems with their existing systems. Up next that we've been seeing on the left-hand side here, vulnerability management. In the past, vulnerability management, you're just giving your four internal scans a year, quarterly scans you're giving to your QSA. That's no longer the case. With 4.0.1, you got to demonstrate that you're not just doing vulnerability scans, but those scans have to be authenticated scans, meaning the authenticated system doing the scans has granular view into the systems and applications that it's scanning, which means that remediation, it may find more things that have to be remediated, and remediation has to have tickets written for the remediation, and those tickets will have more granularity. So when you're doing vulnerability management, those tickets can be not just the QSA, not just the ASV or the quarterly internal scans are given to your assessor, but also any actions taken from those scans would be given to the assessor as well within a ticketing system. The other thing is encryption. There's a lot of emphasis on encryption, a lot of new requirements around encryption, and just making sure your keys are managed. You have roles associated with the key management process for when certificates have to be revoked or keys have to be distributed. All that has to be documented for how the encryption mechanisms are in place and that they're working effectively. And then finally, logging, alerting, and response. It's no longer just giving your configuration of your SIM over to your QSA, but it's any action taken for whatever alerts came from your SIM. Any action taken from that SIM is documented, and actions have been taken to move the alert to an event or an incident, and all that documentation will also be provided to your QSA. So really, at the end of the day, these four items are the top four items that we would recommend from a technical perspective to be working on as far as priorities go. Emil, back to you.
Thank you. PCI, the new version raises the bar. MFA everywhere, faster patching, validated monitoring, and mature key management. From a technical perspective, PCI 4.01 is about operational resilience. Organizations must prove that authentication is universal, vulnerabilities are remediated quickly, monitoring leads to real responses, and key encryption are managed with enterprise-grade maturity. These priorities not only satisfy compliance but also reduces real-world risk. Ryan?
From a governance perspective, PCI 401 requires organizations to embed compliance into risk management and accountability structures. The 4 priority areas below highlight where governance leaders should focus with specific examples. So the first is the targeted risk analysis ownership. PCI 401 introduces targeted risk analysis, or TRAs, requirements for controls with flexible implementation frequencies. Ownership must be very clear to avoid any kind of gaps that may exist. So, for example, 12.3.2 requires organizations to perform a TRA for controls like password rotation frequency or vulnerability scan cadence. If ownership is unclear, these analyses may be skipped or consistently applied. So assign TRA responsibility to business risk owners and technical leaders. So, for example, CISO for technical controls, head of payments for business processes, to ensure accountability. We'll get into a little bit more detail on these later on. Second would be policy to control traceability. Many PCI 401 failures stem from policies not matching operational controls. Governance must ensure that policies explicitly trace to requirements. Maintain a policy to control matrix mapping for each PCI requirement to the corresponding documented policy and implemented controls. This ensures governance documents are audit ready. 3, training. This is especially important these days. 401 introduces new technical requirements that engineers must understand and be able to implement correctly. Sorry, I lost the call. So we want to mandate annual PCI-specific training for engineers, not just generic security awareness training. Training should cover new requirements, customized approaches, and evidence collection practices. 4th, we have third-party responsibility clarity. 401 requires organizations to ensure service providers and vendors meet compliance obligations. Ambiguity in responsibility leads to audit failures. So update contracts and governance frameworks to explicitly assign PCI responsibility to third parties, require AOCs annually, and document oversight processes. Back to you, Emil.
Thank you. So PCI governance isn't about writing policies. It's about proving ownership, traceability, and accountability across the enterprise. Governance leaders should prioritize clear risk analysis ownership, policy to control traceability, targeted training, and third-party responsibility clarity. These areas ensure that compliance is not just technical execution, but a programmatic risk-driven discipline that withstands QSA scrutiny. Next we have is on the topic of TRA, targeted risk analysis. It's one of the most misunderstood changes in PCI 4.01. What is it and what it is not? Ryan, back to you.
Sure. Targeted risk analysis in PCI 401 is a mandatory, ongoing, control-specific process that ties decisions to business impact, not a one-off document or an optional exercise. So TRA isn't optional. It's whenever the standard allows flexibility and control frequency or implementation, you need to have a TRA implemented and actually judge those risks. It's not a one-time document. TRA must be maintained as a living risk artifact. It updated as systems, threats, and business processes change. So a TRA defining log review frequency must be revisited if the organization migrates to a new SIM platform or expands cloud services. Treating TRA as a static document will fail compliance. So it must be specific to the control. TRAs are control level analyses, not broad enterprise assessments. Each TRA must justify the frequency or method for that specific PCI requirement. It needs to be approved by management. Governance requires formal sign-off by accountable leaders. It needs to be reviewed periodically. TRAs must be reviewed and visited on a defined schedule, annually or when major changes occur, for instance. It needs to be tied to business impact and not just likelihood. TRAs must evaluate business impacts, for example, financial loss, reputational damage, and not just technical likelihood. So, for example, a TRA for vulnerability remediation timeline should weigh the impact of delayed patching on customer trust and transaction integrity, not just the probability of exploit. This ensures risk decisions align with organizational priorities. So, Emil, please continue on with TRAs.
Thank you. So, targeted risk analysis is one of the most misunderstood elements of PCI 4.01. because organizations often mistake it for optional or static documentation. In reality, TRAs are mandatory, dynamic control specific, management approved, and tied to business impact. Treating TRA as a governance tool rather than a compliance artifact ensures organizations meet both the letter and spirit of PCI 4.01. As a QSA, Armand, what do we need to know in this area?
Thanks, Emil. And Ryan, you're both correct. Targeted risk analysis is one of the most scrutinized areas in PCI DSS 401. Most organizations don't fail because they skip TRAs. They fail because the TRAs aren't defensible during audit. Let me walk through the four most common issues we see in the industry. First is the generic risk language. We frequently see TRAs that use vague statements like risk is low or threat unlikely with no context. For example, a TRA adjusting password rotation frequency that simply claims industry risk is low without addressing the organization's actual authentication environment, such as legacy systems or privileged accounts, that will not hold up. From a QSA standpoint, risk language must be specific to the control and the environment that reference real threats like phishing or credential stuffing, along with the business impact to your organization. Second is the no defined frequency of review. Another common failure is treating TRA as one-time document. Without defined review cadence annually or after significant changes in your PCI environment, QSAs will flag this as not compliant. Okay. Third, no evidence of management approval. Many TRAs are written by technical teams, but never formally approved. For instance, like Ryan cited earlier, a TRA adjusting vulnerability remediation timelines may be documented by IT, but without sign-off from the CISO or risk committee. From QSA perspective, that's incomplete. TRAs must show management approval, typically through documented sign-off or governance workflow evidence. Okay. And finally, no linkage to the actual control. We also see TRAs written at high level, don't map back to a specific PCI requirement. For example, discussing malware risks without tying directly to requirement 5.2.3 and the chosen anti-malware scanning frequency. If the TRA is not explicitly linked to the requirement it supports, QSA cannot validate compliance. Remember, a strong TRA clearly links risk control approval review into a single story. Under PCI DSS 401, TRAs are not paperwork. They are evidence. When well done, they enable flexibility. When done poorly, they become audit blockers. Yeah, hand it back to you, Mia.
So from a QSA perspective, the most common TRA failures are the generic language, missing review cycles, lack of management approval, and weak linkage to controls. Organizations that treat TRA as a governance artifact, specific approved, reviewed, and tied to business impact will succeed under 4.01. Larry, I guess you're next.
You bet. Yes, and taking it to a technical perspective, what we wanted to do here is we wanted to list out all the TRAs that are required under 4.0.1, and just to look up in the upper right-hand corner, just the frequency of periodic evaluations of system components identified as not at risk of malware. You define that in your target risk analysis, right? 5.2.3.1. You want to actually put the reason why you would have in your TRA, you'd put the reason why you think your components don't need to have don't need to have anti-malware. And in that TRA, you could specify it's an IBM Unix, IBM system, or AS400 or a mainframe. Whatever the reason is, in your TRA, you would say, oh, this is not commonly affected by malware, and here's the reasons why. And you want to make it as specific about your environment as possible. In other words, use real operational data in your environment. You won't be able to copy and paste from the organization down the street. It's got to be your environment, specific to your environment. The other thing is you document the safeguards, the reasons why you're not doing it, and the safeguards around why you don't have to do it. And you also integrate that with your existing enterprise risk frameworks. So, for example, if you're using NIST or High Trust, HIPAA, ISO, anything you're using on your enterprise risk management environment, you want to do this, the scoring mechanisms that are being used. You don't want to recreate the wheel. So use the same scoring mechanisms that your enterprise risk management team are already using to determine the frequencies, the risks, the vulnerabilities, and threats that are associated with why you're not doing something. But again, this is your list. But again, that's the important thing here is if you have any questions on writing your TRAs, we're certainly here to help. Everybody on this panel has assisted our clients with helping write these TRAs. Emil, back to you.
Very well said, Larry. From a technical perspective, doing TRA correctly means mapping threats to vulnerabilities and impacts, grounding analysis in real system data, documenting compensating safeguards, and aligning with enterprise frameworks. This transforms TRA from a misunderstood compliance artifact into a credible, defensible risk management tool. Armand, what are the biggest pain points organizations face when transitioning from 3 to 1?
Ooh, great question, Amiel. The biggest pain points we see when organizations move from 321 to 401 fall into four main areas. Right? These are not the article, but they're the exact reasons assessments slow down or control fail. First, increased evidence expectation. 401 shifts the bar from point-in-time evidence to continuous demonstration of control effectiveness. As indicated by Larry and Ryan, under 321, quarterly screenshot or static reports were frequently acceptable. Under 401, QSAs expect automated logs, monitoring outputs, and response record that shows issues were detected and addressed in real time. From an assessment standpoint, organizations without evidence automation struggle the most here. Okay. Second, loss of accepted practice assumption. Practices that were once considered good enough are no longer optional. What used to be best practice is now explicitly required. A common example, you heard MFA earlier, often limited to admin access. Right? Under 401, MFA is required broadly, including users and third-party access to their CVE. So organizations relying on legacy interpretation have to redesign controls, not just update documentations. Third, more assessors' judgment. 401 introduces customized approach, which increases flexibility, but also increases reliance on QSA judgment. This makes early engagement critical because assessor interpretation now carries more weight than under 321. And finally, controls that passed for years may now fail. This is repeatedly the most frustrating pain point. Controls that were previously accepted may now fail due to expanded scope or stricter definition. Remember, past success does not equal to current compliance. So from a QSA perspective, the transition from 401 requires organization to revalidate every control, invest in strong evidence, and engage earlier. PCI DSS 401 does not penalize organization with mature security programs, but it does expose undocumented assumptions and informal practices that cannot be tested. Back to you, Emil.
Thanks, Armin. From a QSA perspective, just trying to summarize, the transition pain points highlight why PCI 4.01 is more than an update. It is a paradigm shift. Organizations must prepare for higher evidence standards, stricter control definitions, greater reliance on assessor interpretation, and the need to revalidate every control. Early engagement with QSAs and Apex, us, and investment in automation are critical to avoid surprises during certification. What are your thoughts, Larry?
Yeah, and again, here what we wanted to do is just get a little more detail on the four we talked about earlier: MFA, continuous monitoring and logging, automated internal vulnerability scanning, and legacy systems. So with this, what we want to do here is just grab another example of talking about your legacy systems for a little bit here, as in our example in this case. Legacy systems that cannot do the controls that are required in PCI 4.0, 4.1, 0.1 If they can't do it, there are maybe three options you will look at with your legacy systems. If it cannot do MFA, we'll use MFA because again that's a common theme. But with MFA, if your legacy systems can't do it, you probably have three options. One is maybe segregate the legacy system in its own environment and use another authentication mechanism to get to those legacy systems. So segmentation might be considered doing, or compensating control for that legacy system. Maybe you have different compensating controls that you can use for that legacy system to make it work. And then when you have your assessment, you would fill out the compensating control worksheet to demonstrate that you've done a risk analysis on those compensating controls that would demonstrate that you're meeting the intent of legacy systems that can't meet the timelines of patching and MFA. You at least you've done your due diligence to demonstrate that you're doing that. Or in the worst case, you may have to replace your legacy systems because they can't meet all the requirements of the new 4.0.1. But that's one example of something you could do to ensure that your pain points are mitigated, to ensure that you can meet PCI requirements. And if you can't do it, again, this would be a good, you might set up a working session to walk through the gaps that you have and what you need to do and come up with a roadmap to remediate those items that cannot meet the PCI 4.0 compliance. Emil, back to you.
Thank you, Larry. Again, to summarize from a technical perspective, the biggest pain points is transitioning to 3.2.1 are expanding MFA coverage, adopting continuous vulnerability management, automating log review validation, and dealing with legacy systems that can't keep up. Addressing these areas early with automation, modern tooling, and compensating controls where necessary helps organizations avoid audit failures and strengthen their overall security posture. What pain points can you share with us, Ryan?
Thank you, Emil. From a governance perspective, the transition from 3.2.1 to 4.0.1 exposes organizational pain points that go beyond technical controls. The challenges are rooted in ownership, accountability, culture, and planning. So common organizational pain points would include business resistance to risk ownership. Under 3.2.1, compliance was often seen as an IT problem. PCI 4.0.1 requires business leaders to own risk tied to cardholder data. Without business buy-in, risk ownerships remain siloed, leading to gaps in oversight. No clear accountability for targeted risk analyses. So PCI 4.0.1 introduces the TRAs for controls with flexible implementation frequency, but many organizations don't know who or should or how that should be owned. QSAs often find the TRAs are written generically without linkage to specific controls or management approval, and thus failing compliance. Training gaps. Engineers and business staff often lack awareness of the new requirements, especially around script management 6.4.3 and real-time change detection 11.6.1. So developers may continue deploying third-party scripts without authorization because they haven't been trained on PCI 4.0.1's stricter rules. Without targeted training, organizations risk failing controls that pass for years under 3.2.1. And finally, we have underestimating effort. Many organizations assume transitioning from 3.2.1 to 4.0.1 is a simple mapping exercise, as we mentioned before. In reality, it requires fresh gap assessments, policy updates, and cultural change. For example, 8.4.3 mandates phishing resistance MFA. Organizations that budgeted for only annual audits often discover late that legacy IAM systems cannot support this, requiring major investment. Underestimating effort leads to last-minute scrambles, budget overruns, and failed assessments. You, Emil?
Thank you. From a governance perspective, the biggest pain points in transitioning from the old version are the business resistance to risk ownership, unclear accountability for TRA, training gaps, and understanding the effort required. Addressing this early through clear role assignments, targeted training, and realistic planning ensures organizations avoid audit failures and build sustainable compliance. Let's talk pitfalls. What mistakes are you seeing repeatedly, and how can organizations avoid them? We'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Armin, please.
Thanks, Emil. 4.0.1 pitfalls are often less about technical gaps and more about timing, preparation, and mindset. The most common pitfall is waiting until assessment time. Right? Many organizations still treat PCI DSS 401 the way they treated 321, reviewing the requirements only as the annual assessment approaches. Under 321, as indicated earlier, quarterly vulnerability scan or annual policy reviews were often sufficient. Under 401, requirements like targeted risk analysis, script inventory, and authorization and real-time change detection require continuous evidence, not last-minute screenshots. So from QSA standpoint, when organizations wait until audit season, they end up scrambling to recreate evidence that should have been produced throughout the year. Right? This leads to failed controls, remediation plans, and unnecessary strain during the audit. The avoidance strategy is performing readiness assessment early, ideally 6 to 9 months in advance, right? So a readiness assessment well ahead of the formal audit allows organizations to identify gaps while there's still time to address them properly. We regularly uncover gaps during our readiness assessment engagement, but when these issues are addressed early, teams avoid last-minute system changes and policy rewrites before validation. From QSA perspective, early readiness also allows assessors to help interpret requirements, validate customized approaches, and guide evidence collection before findings become formal. Waiting until assessment time almost turns manageable gaps into major problems. So remember, PCI readiness is not extra work. It is what makes PCI certification predictable instead of painful. Back to you, Emil.
Thank you. So the most repeated pitfall is waiting until assessment time. The best avoidance strategy is to treat PCI 4.01 as a continuous program with readiness assessments conducted months in advance. Again, this ensures organizations have time to remediate gaps, align evidence, and approach certification with confidence. How about you, Larry?
Yep. Thank you, Emil. From a technical perspective, this is going to sound contradictory what we said earlier, but from a technical perspective, I think everyone on this panel will agree that we all love technology. But one of the pitfalls is people rely too much on technology. PCI is not just a technology, standard. It's a governance standard, really. Any regulation is really a governance. So relying too much on technology, meaning you implement it and ignore it, right? If you just implement your logging system or whatever technology, we'll use logging because we've said it before. But the QSA is not just going to look at the logging system configuration or the dashboard. Again, they're going to know that you've implemented this logging mechanism or the SIM or the SOAR or your endpoint detection and response, whatever you implemented, what actions are taken after you get alerts from that technology, or you need to take action based on what the technology is telling you. Have people validating the processes, the underlying processes around the technology is one of the key things that you can do to avoid that pitfall of just relying on technology. Another thing is just not using policies and standards written about the technology or your vendor documentation about the technology. Again, make sure somebody's validating on a regular cadence, maybe quarterly, because that seems to be a theme too within PCI, quarterly or semi-annually. Make sure somebody's validating that the controls are not just in place, but they're effectively demonstrated. And the second thing you can do is that you assign people roles and responsibilities, or RACI matrix, responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. You assign people tasks on a regular basis, and this is where we like ticketing systems. Maybe write tickets with labels on them for the PCI requirement, and have somebody doing those tasks on a regular cadence to ensure that controls are working effectively. I think those two things, if you do those, you'll be more in line in position, as Armand and Emil and Ryan were saying earlier, making this continuous and ongoing. You'll be a lot further along if you just do those two things. Having people validate and not relying on technology alone. Emil, back to you.
Thank you. So the repeated pitfall is over reliance on dashboards and tools without validating the process behind them. The way to avoid is to document, demonstrate human response, escalation, and remediation workflows. This ensures compliance evidence is credible, actionable, and aligned with the new PCI 4.01 focus on outcomes. Ryan, you're next.
Okay, thank you, Emil. So as mentioned before, probably one of the biggest pitfalls is with that is treating compliance as an IT-only exercise. The standard now demands enterprise-wide accountability, making executive sponsorship and business risk management even more and ownership more essential. So under PCI 321, many organizations delegated compliance almost exclusively to IT and security teams. In 401, this siloed approach fails because new requirements require that they are tied to business processes, policies, and risk governance. So PCI 401 expects cross-functional ownerships from executives to engineers because cardholder data risk spans technology, operations, and business strategies. Another thing is avoidance, executive sponsorship and business risk avoidance. So treat PCI 401 as a program embedded in enterprise risk management, not as a technical checklist. Executive sponsorship ensures funding for continuous monitoring tools, while business leaders own risk decisions tied to customer trust and revenue. When executive sponsor PCI programs and business leaders own risks, organizations demonstrate that compliance is aligned with enterprise governance and not just IT operations. Emil?
Thank you. The repeated governance pitfall, is treating PCI as IT only. The way to avoid it is through executive sponsorship and clear business risk ownership, ensuring compliance is embedded into organizational governance and risk frameworks. This shift not only satisfies the QSAs, but also strengthen enterprise resilience. So, in closing, if you could give one final piece of advice to organizations preparing for PCI 4.01 certification, what would it be? Let's go through from a QSA perspective, technical and executive management. Armin, take it.
Thanks, Emil. My one piece of advice is simple, right? Do not wait until audit season to involve your compliance partners, meaning engage your PCI team, your PCI consultants early and regularly throughout your PCI DSS 4.0.1 journey. Early engagement matter because this version is far more intent-based than prior versions. Early collaboration ensures your evidence, risk analysis, and customized controls that we talk about are defensible before the audit and not debated during the audit. Okay? Remember, this version of the standard introduces more flexibility, which, based on my observation, works well for security mature organizations. But with that flexibility comes with responsibility and the need for interpretation, rationale, and documentations that QSAs must ultimately accept. Thank you, everyone. I'll hand back to you, Emil.
Oh, I think Larry's going to be next, right?
Yes. Yep. I think I'm gonna do a plug here. Take this PowerPoint that Erica is gonna send you later today, and use that to determine if you have any gaps. But I'll go back to the two that I think are most effective. Ensure that inventories are up to date. Take those mind maps, take those lists, and make sure you got all your inventories where they need to be. That'll go a long way, as Armand was saying, towards preparing for your assessor and doing it all year long versus cramming for that assessment. And the second thing is take that list of automation recommendations we gave you and use that to determine, hey, as a starting place of where can you take your manual tasks? What manual task are you doing today? And maybe you can write PowerShell scripts or whatever tools you can do, PowerShell, Python, whatever your favorite coding language is, and make some scripts to make those more automated, or tools, invest in tools to make things more automated. I think those two items will go a long way towards meeting compliance and reducing your overall cybersecurity risk, is by having your inventory and automation where you can. Back to you, Emil.
Actually, it's to me.
Yep.
I would say that the two most important things are number one, like we said, like we started off with, don't treat it like it's a project. Treat it like it's a program. It's something that's ongoing and it has to be continually done throughout the year. The other thing was executive sponsorship and risk ownership, and spreading that out amongst the teams, not having that siloed approach anymore, really taking an enterprise perspective to your PCI compliance, because the risk is not just owned by one department. It's owned throughout the entire organization. So also with that support from executive leadership, then you have executive sponsorship that ensures funding, accountability, and alignment with the enterprise risk frameworks. Turning PCI from a compliance burden to a resilience strategy. Back to you, Emil.
Thank you very much. So again, to close this one, PCI 4.01 isn't about passing an audit. It's about proving your controls work, your risks are owned, and your evidence is continuous. PCI 4.01 now elevates Apex capabilities from checklist verifiers to strategic security advisors. By focusing on outcomes, interpreting intent, conducting fresh gap analysis, and engaging early, Apex can help organizations achieve certification while strengthening their security posture. Again, PCI 4.01 is both a challenge and an opportunity. It elevates the role from an auditor to security advisor, requiring deeper engagement, sharper interpretation, and a focus on outcomes. Organizations that embrace this shift early will not only achieve certification, but also strengthen their overall security posture. So in summary, practical approach for PCI: scope the environment carefully, run a structured gap analysis, prioritize the high impact changes, document the intent driven controls, enable continuous monitoring. And hopefully, we've brought something new to this group, and looking forward to hear back and help you guys mature your PCI program. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. That was a lot of helpful information. And to echo what Larry said, a really, really good checklist. So I dropped the slide deck in, and you're also going to get that along with the recording in a follow-up email. And as you guys probably just saw, and to echo what Emil said, we have a growing security and risk practice, a lot of expertise around PCI, and so much, much more. So if you want to learn more about what Apex offers in these areas, go ahead and talk to your current Apex point of contact. If you don't have one, I can certainly help you. You can always reply to one of the emails that you get. Those always go to me. So I know I've got a couple questions in queue. You guys called it. We're probably not going to have time to really do any of these questions justice. So what I'm going to say is we're going to take these questions back. And if you have any other questions you haven't had a chance to get in, again, just reply to one of the emails that you get about these webinars. Those go directly to my inbox, and I can compile them, and Emil and team will work on notes. But did you guys have a question you saw that you wanted to tackle that was an easier answer? And Eric, yes, I've got all your questions you threw into the chat box.
I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah.
Sorry, apologies for that. But maybe we can circle back and compile those and send out an FAQ to the participants here. Again, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.